Hello, welcome to Mark Snow's completely unofficial but reasonably well-informed look behind the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony. When director Danny Boyle was asked, how do you compete with the 2008 Beijing opening ceremony, his reply was basically, you don't. Fortunately, contemplation of British and Chinese culture suggested an alternative. London could be, as in some respects it always had, yin to Beijing's yang. There was one rather startling consequence of that approach in terms of overall style. Beijing, presenting China to the wider world in 2008, had used the psychological principle of cognitive ease to ensure that the sophisticated ceremony left TV viewers with some clear and happy impressions. Patterns promote cognitive ease, and so does repetition. So off we go. We shall see that London's approach was based rather more on cognitive strain, making people wonder what the heck was going on. However, the actual theme of the 2012 presentation of British culture was, "This is for everyone." Although inspired by one particular example of Britain's contributions to the world, as indicated within the ceremony, this became a guiding philosophy. In the official souvenir programme, for example, it was associated with photos of thousands of ordinary people who had volunteered to join in. Another contrast with Beijing, where most performers were drafted in from the armed forces or martial arts organisations. This rule affected the ceremony at the most basic level. TV and stadium spectators have very different viewpoints, and there had been a tendency to give TV priority. Big patterns, for example, look fine from the very high viewpoints, but the lower you go, the less sense they make. Indeed, using Beijing's approach of sophisticated small-scale activities with the giant patterns acting like picture frames, the lowest rows of spectators could really only see the frames. However, this was preferable to the approach in the Athens 2004 opening ceremony, where 95% of the stadium spectators would have been better off staying at home. The entire performance was aimed at a small area where the VIPs and TV cameras were, and the one serious attempt at performing with a large cast, the Clepsydra Parade of Greek history, was cut short for most of the audience by turning the lights out once the last wagon had passed the TV cameras. We shall see how London attempted some radical changes to make a show for all audiences. TV and stadium experiences are very different. On TV, although your view is confined to a restricted rectangle, multiple cameras can show even small details of the action. But if two separate actions take place at the same time, you are reliant on the skill of the broadcasters to show them. In the stadium, the experience fills your entire field of vision. Although your viewpoint is fixed and you can't really see small details unless you take binoculars, your brain can easily analyse multiple events taking place within a fraction of a second, which is one reason why football, with its flowing action, is such a great stadium spectacle. Of course, if the action in every part of the arena is exactly the same, all that does not apply. The overall motto of the London 2012 Olympic Games was "Inspire a Generation," and this was built into the opening ceremony in some surprising ways. For a start, consider the generations of your ancestors, your parents, their parents, and so on. Living memory doesn't get us back much beyond great-grandparents, people old enough to remember the last time London hosted the Olympic Games in 1948. Ancestry, however, goes a very, very long way beyond living memory. In terms of identifying our ancestors, we often struggle to get back even as far as the time of Shakespeare, a mere 400 years ago. If the 1948 Olympics are one of our ancestral touchstones, let's make Shakespeare another. He may have become entangled with this event in a rather peculiar way. Back in 2005, when London was accepted as host for the 2012 Olympic Games, the plan was to take the Inspire a Generation concept right round the world on a sailing ship crewed by young people and adult mentors. By about 2007, the concept ran aground on the rocks of common sense, but echoes of it can still be observed in the opening ceremony. One such echo is the use of Shakespeare's play The Tempest, a very strange tale of shipwrecked mariners and the innate power of books. If you have never seen or read The Tempest, you are missing an extraordinary and disturbing layer of meaning in the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony. By the way, one layer of meaning you're almost certainly not missing is the stuff about Illuminati and/or satanic conspiracies. Here is a well-known picture of a pyramid with an eye at the top. Here is a picture of the Olympic Stadium with what appear superficially to be similar shapes all around the roof. However, they are not pyramids, and the resemblance is in the eye of the beholder. Being pointed but fairly flat, the triangles more closely resemble thorns, for example. An oval ring of thorns is about as far from satanic as he can get. The designers of the stadium probably just had an ordinary crown in mind, but we'll see that the opening ceremony includes several clear acknowledgements of Britain's Christian heritage. So now, welcome to the early evening of 27th July 2012, and let's set sail for the Isles of Wonder. Here comes the yin and yang from the moment we enter the stadium. In Beijing, there had been little clue on arrival to the amazing riches which would be presented during the evening. The warm-up acts performed on a bare, almost bleak grey floor. To greet spectators in 2012, London built a detailed microcosm of ancestral long-ago Britain. Around the timeless farm were 4 maypoles, each topped with a flower representing one of the 4 countries which make up the United Kingdom. At the north end of the stadium was a hill with terraces of paths up to the summit. This was named Glastonbury Tor, after a real hill with similar terraces in the county of Somerset. The town of Glastonbury is famous today for New Age mysticism and for its summer festival of music and arts, which was also reproduced in microcosm through the inclusion of a mosh pit at the foot of the hill. The mosh pit and its southern equivalent, the posh pit, were occupied by people from the London boroughs around the Olympic Park. About 100 minutes before the televised show was due to start, another British symbol emerged. Fluffy rain clouds which were paraded round the perimeter of the countryside scene. As more spectators arrived, helpful messages and short videos began to be shown on the upper screens. Then, about 70 minutes before the TV start, real livestock began to arrive on the farm. Cattle, goats, sheep with a sheepdog, geese, ducks and hens. Oops, nearly forgot the cart horse. Gradually, more and more TV stations worldwide began broadcasting warm-up coverage, but they showed only glimpses of the tranquil countryside scene. 50 minutes before the televised performance was due to start, Master of Ceremonies Curtis Walker arrived, and the spectators soon got their first taste of the show's secret weapon, the pixel paddles, which turned the entire auditorium into a video display. They had only a couple of minutes to get used to that, then the upper screen showed a new delight approaching. The Red Arrows air display team approached the stadium from just the right direction to pass over a big screen viewing site in nearby Stratford Park. They cleared the stadium at almost exactly 12 minutes past 8. That's 2012 on the digital clock displayed by the pixel paddles. Then, as the French TV team happily commented on the aerial display of the French flag, the Red Arrows continued on their straight course, over another big screen site in Victoria Park. Rural life continued in the stadium, and Curtis was joined by audience participation trainer Tash. With the Red Arrows gone, the evening's unidentified flying objects took up their positions, ready to look really mysterious after dark. The first participation activity practice was sea silk. Just after that, the rural scene began a major cultural element of This Is For Everyone with a cricket match. Cricket is one of a number of sports played at professional level on every continent, which are based on rules devised in Britain, and we will see some other examples as this scene continues. Rural life and zany participation practice continued until it was time for the evening's first musical performance by Frank Turner.
If I had been born 200 years ago, I would have been a sailor, a-sailing I would go.
Meanwhile, the farm gained a scarecrow, and London suffered a genuine shower of rain. The spectators could hold the pixel paddles in their hands and wave them around, which they did with considerable vigour. Badminton was added to the rural activities, and soon some footballers arrived. Then, bizarrely, young musicians wearing formal dress and very modern running shoes started wandering through the timeless rural landscape. Cue Danny Boyle, captain of the whole mad enterprise.
So the saying that Billy Connolly has, which applies in many ways, I don't believe in God, but I believe in the people who do. These people believe in a spirit that is quite transforming.
Frank Turner then returned with a proper band this time. However, a timeless rural picnic party at the foot of the tour didn't notice. The people in the mosh pit and the posh pit did, though. They had been provided with banners designed by children from schools all over the country. While the band played 2 songs, all sorts of rural activities continued. Next up in the modern world was United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon making the traditional call for an Olympic truce. The sheep certainly ignored him. Why are those people running off to the right of the Spanish commentator? They are the football match, complete with spectators, which has turned into a rugby match, and the ball is being carried right out of the rural landscape and round the peripheral road, then right out of the stadium, but back in a few moments later. While you were distracted, the sheep all escaped, and they'll soon be followed by most of the other animals before the performance gets too noisy. Now the young musicians from the London Symphony Orchestra's On Track project did their stuff. As they played Nimrod by Sir Edward Elgar, scenes of the sea were displayed on the upper screens, and the spectators used the blue silks to transform themselves into the sea, surrounding the Isles of Wonder. The pixel paddles formed a vast display of crashing waves. With a minute to go before the international TV broadcast began, the upper screens displayed an eccentric 60-second countdown. This was not meant for the TV audience, but some broadcasters attempted to show it one way or another. The countdown numbers were all photographed in London, some very obviously so, which sounds trivial until you consider that the 2008 opening ceremony included very little that was associated specifically with Beijing itself, rather than generic Chinese culture. Ditto for Athens in 2004. The French attempt to show parts of the countdown full screen ran into some timing problems. OK TV viewers, it's 9 p.m. on 27th July 2012. Welcome to the crazy world the stadium spectators have been inhabiting all evening. This introductory film is almost as important to understanding the opening ceremony as The Tempest. For a start, in presenting the River Thames from its source in Gloucestershire to its mingling with the tide east of London, it conveys 2 key concepts: a journey from birth through maturity and beyond, and a suggestion that viewers should go with the flow. Although the film is being shown on the stadium screens, the rural activities are still going on as if the modern world does not exist, now featuring local children dancing round the 4 maypoles. The film also makes it clear that viewers of the ceremony will need to think about what is left unsaid. Here, for example, are some of the lyrics from the Sex Pistols song God Save the Queen, which accompanies us under the bridges of central London. Dreaming will be a recurring motif in the opening ceremony. International viewers don't really need to know that the drum beats accompanying this aerial view are from a TV theme tune, but it is another clue to one of the subjects of the presentation. Mainly, though, it's a reminder of the shape of East London, with the stadium at top centre of the picture. Beijing had a countdown with about 2008 beautiful drums. London has local school kids holding balloons, which mostly go pop. Then, as the pixel paddles go into rainbow-coloured frenzy, we are welcomed to the show.
Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à Londres et aux Jeux de la 30e Olympiade.
Cyclist Bradley Wiggins, who had just won the Tour de France, rings the world's largest harmonically tuned bell. Its main note is a very low B. As the bell sounds, 4 weather balloons with tiny sets of Olympic rings attached are released for a journey to the upper atmosphere. After the ceremony, the bell has found a permanent home next to the stadium. One of the major unspoken elements of the ceremony is that it's not unique. The first and only other great Olympic bell was made for the 1936 Nazi Olympics in Berlin. Although damaged in the Second World War, it's still on display there. In a sense, the sort of Olympic ceremonies we're all used to were invented by the Nazis. Although there had been occasional displays like this 1928 student performance in Amsterdam and formations of 5 rings of people, the notion of opening the Olympic Games with thousands of people making great big patterns in the stadium was an extension of techniques developed in Nazi rallies. That's one more reason why London was not about to try outdoing Beijing. Instead, we take a gentle country stroll. The title of this section of the performance is taken directly from the first song which is heard, a musical setting of a poem by William Blake, based on the legend of Glastonbury, and which also contains the phrase, "Chariot of Fire." The musical setting is now considered as England's unofficial national anthem, but if you study the words, you will find that they do not present the country in a rosy light.
And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills, and was Jerusalem builded here among those dark satanic mills?
Speaking of rosy light, it's looking like evening in the countryside as timeless activities continue to accompany the music. Filmed inserts of national songs from the United Kingdom's other countries are accompanied by fragments of rugby matches featuring their teams, a reminder that the founder of the modern Olympics was inspired by reading about sport at rugby school. The Welsh national song is another hymn, this time without double-edged lyrics.
Guide me, O thou great Redeemer.
While that is being sung, historic horse-drawn London buses arrive, bringing a lot of men in black. The first thing they do is occupy the cricket pitch. One of them, carrying a portentous red book, marches up onto Glastonbury Tor. The timeless past, full of unknown ancestors as symbolised by the lack of TV coverage, is coming to an end. The next scene takes place in the set of past generations about which we know quite a lot. Coincidentally, it also covers a period which was discreetly downplayed in Beijing's opening ceremony. Its title is Pandemonium, which, like many other aspects of this ceremony, should be understood in all its meanings. The gentleman with the book is not Abraham Lincoln, but Isambard Kingdom Brunel, one of the great heroes of the 19th century Industrial Revolution. He also happens to have been quite a fan of Shakespeare, and now he reads an extract from The Tempest. In the play, the words are spoken by the character Caliban, who is also referenced in the titles of the original music composed for this ceremony by Underworld. You really need to investigate Caliban, the context of these words in the play, and the context of The Tempest in the history of European sea voyages. No Olympic opening ceremony would be complete without a bunch of drummers, but there's no rule to say they have to be down in the middle of the stadium. This is where we start to get a serious taste of the way London 2012 tries to avoid making the stadium spectators secondary to the TV cameras. We also get a taste of London's refusal to make things simple. Expect the unexpected, like Glastonbury Tor turning into a mine. Hundreds upon hundreds of shabbily dressed workers appear. And they do actual work. This is not a performance, it is a statement. The men in black have been equated with capitalists, but they aren't. Like Brunel, they are professional engineers and designers, and the movements they make help them to understand work processes in order to design machines to perform them more efficiently. Britain was the first country in the world to develop combustion-based industrial processes on a really large scale. This chimney was another surprise and another aspect of London's determination to cater for the stadium audience. Instead of big patterns on the ground, there's a lot of vertical activity in this opening ceremony. Then again, this is a response to one of Beijing's rare vertical moments. The point being that the real experience in China today is probably much closer to pandemonium than to 2008's elegant pillars. By the way, we're still very much in Milton's original pandemonium here. The drummers are establishing themselves round the periphery of the no longer green or pleasant land. Throughout the show there will be performances both in the centre and round the outer track, so that spectators on all levels in the auditorium get their own treats. Another surprise as Brunel gets his photo taken. France took its photographic invention down a cul-de-sac of unique images, while William Fox Talbot invented the transparent negative, which enabled multiple copies to be created from a single original. A little rebuke to Athens here, shrouded lights round the foot of the audience seating which can illuminate the peripheral performers. Another surprise as the industrial era reaches the beginning of the 20th century. Women's rights activists arrive round the flanks of the tour. In keeping with the spirit of Inspire a Generation, they are led by two descendants of original suffragettes Emmeline and Sylvia Pankhurst. London had an unusual notion of big patterns. Removal of the grass from the site of the vanished maypoles revealed 4 circular sunbursts, with a 5th circle in the centre of the arena, which had briefly contained a grass pattern in the shape of a Celtic cross. The timeline has reached 1914. And here's a worker's eye view across one of the patterns as everybody stands still, facing the centre of the arena to commemorate the victims of war. Not shown on TV, some of the upper screens listed the names of hundreds of young men from a single community who were killed in battle within about 30 minutes in 1916. One British person who turned his experiences of the First World War into a memorable work of literature was J.R.R. Tolkien. The scriptwriter for the opening ceremony, Frank Cottrell Boyce, has denied that there is any Tolkien connection in the show, but the notion became an internet meme. Here's one reason why: a comparison of the rural scene with Tolkien's Hobbiton. The chapter titled The Scouring of the Shire from Lord of the Rings gives us the opportunity to contemplate a very interesting potential unspoken message. To recap, we have seen the green and pleasant land stripped away by the Industrial Revolution to reveal this familiar topography. Here's how it worked in real life, as seen in 2 maps 200 years apart. First the 1720s, when much of the area was used for rough grazing. And then the 1920s. All that pink stipple is urban development, but also the apparently open areas round the docks would be yards for temporary storage. Now back to the performance, and a depiction of one of the great early triumphs of the Industrial Revolution, making very large, high-quality metal castings suitable for machinery. Flywheels were used from the 1780s onward to enable smooth conversion of linear piston motion to rotation. Another vastly significant development about the same time was the fully mechanised weaving loom, of which 2 examples are seen at left here. Surprise! Suddenly a whole new level of performance begins all around the periphery of the arena, depicting elements of society in the last decades of Britain's industrial era. This yellow submarine is a sign of things to come, Britain's success in the post-industrial age. The yellow submarines followed a squad of 1967-style Sgt. Pepper Beetles, who in turn are following a procession of genuine old soldiers. Pensioners from the Royal Hospital at Chelsea in West London. East London is represented by traditional pearly kings and queens, illuminated here by some of the shrouded lights. There's also the Grimethorpe Colliery Brass Band from Yorkshire. Note how, unlike in Athens, these performers are entering the arena from multiple points and circulating in different directions. Meanwhile, other great rings have been cast on other continents and are drifting on the breeze towards London. This is a papier-mâché model of the SS Windrush, which in 1948 brought a large group of skilled and professional workers from the West Indies to Britain, the first of many immigrants who helped the UK's economy to recover after the Second World War. Yes, that's 1948, the year of the last London Olympics. The immigrants also enriched Britain's culture in many ways. Here's the Nostalgia Steel Band. And here are performers from the Mahogany Carnival Dance Group, who will join with the Steel Band to represent London's famous Notting Hill Carnival. My list of peripheral performance groups is not complete. See how many others you can spot in videos of the ceremony. Finally, of course, all the 5 hot metal rings come together. Beijing had firework waterfalls fictitiously creating its lovely LED light Olympic rings. But London has its foundry workers standing under a shower of genuine glowing embers, which can be seen making a ring pattern as they land on the floor. Viewers in many countries will not be aware that the Beijing opening ceremony showed various interludes between its stunning set pieces, because their local broadcasters took the opportunity to show some commercials instead. The London team decided to do something mischievous. They made some of the most unmissable interludes in TV history. The biggest surprise in this first one, based on an idea by set designer Mark Tildesley, is Daniel Craig's 007 co-star, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
The mischief even extends to the choice of music to accompany the royal helicopter flight, the theme from a film about a British bombing raid on German reservoirs during the Second World War. No wonder Winston Churchill was happy. The time as seen on the Parliament clock is 25 to 9 because this part of the scene was filmed earlier. The helicopter was delayed for well over half an hour at the perimeter of the heavily defended Olympic Air Exclusion Zone, so it was getting dark by the time the Queen arrived. But there she is, landing just outside the stadium to join her husband. Incidentally, from the Red Arrows onward, this opening ceremony featured an unusual number of events which could be seen and filmed from outside the Olympic Park, providing a nice opportunity for broadcasters who are otherwise restricted to 30 seconds of official ceremony video for their news bulletins. The Queen's safe arrival means we have reached the era of living ancestors who remember the 1948 Olympics. She herself was uncomfortably pregnant at the time, but she did serve as official starter for the cycling road race in Windsor Great Park. There was a notable absence of children in the pandemonium performance. It was all about potential mothers and fathers acting like responsible grown-ups. Starting with the Chaos Singing and Signing Choir, which performs the national anthem, this next section is all about children and mostly designed to entertain children. Because it's getting on for 10 p.m, they're all in their pyjamas. Beijing's ceremony cast was heavily militarised, London's definitely wasn't. However, the armed forces were very properly acknowledged, as here in the raising of the Union flag. The childhood theme continues with a section title from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, accompanied by music from The Exorcist.
Please welcome Mike Oldfield and the staff of the United Kingdom National Health Service and our very special guest this evening, patients and staff of Great Ormond Street Hospital.
The music, properly titled Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield, son of a doctor and a nurse, was not written for the film, and without that association it's not sinister at all. Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children was founded in 1852 at the height of London's industrial expansion. Here's another lot of perimeter performers. Why are they dancing to swing music? Well, it's just after midnight on the morning of 5th July 1948, and the National Health Service component of Britain's new welfare state has come into operation. Hurrah! Then again, here's another sinister thought. Before 2012, the most famous TV depiction of swing dancing 1940s doctors and nurses was in Dennis Potter's brilliant and disturbing drama The Singing Detective. Original Michael Gambon version preferred, of course. But anyway, here are some puppies playing among the spectators. Nothing sinister about that, surely. As the children drift into sleep, Shakespeare's The Tempest suggests otherwise. To be asleep is to be totally vulnerable, physically and mentally. Returning to the technicalities, note again the use of vertical elements to the performance. In this celebration of Britain's contributions to children's literature, the pixel paddles really come into their own, depicting evil glowing eyes as the children fall asleep, and then a queasy, stormy background to Voldemort. However, after Mary Poppins tackles the 5 giants and saves the children, the spectators are given the chance to celebrate by showing off the pixel paddle moves they had practiced earlier, creating all sorts of waves and shimmers. By the way, the music for this celebration is Mike Oldfield's hit arrangement of an old Christmas carol, In Dulce Jubilo. Yes, giant, pale, Trainspotting-esque baby that opens up like a book. Interlude time again. In Beijing they had puppets, and just to get it out of the way, there was also an opera singer later on. London too had a performance of serious music by the London Symphony Orchestra conducted by Sir Simon Rattle. You know what happened, so here are some interesting stills from a CGI showreel. At this stage, TV commentators were not supposed to explain who Tim was. #ruin the surprise. We begin with a quick look at the BBC, Britain's 2012 Olympic broadcaster. The 6 pips radio time signal, accurate to a fraction of a second, was created in 1924. The BBC's television service had to close down during the Second World War, and it did not start showing proper TV news bulletins with filmed inserts until 1948, which was also the year the BBC first considered following an Australian example and creating a radio soap opera to spread practical advice for farmers. However, 1948, also the year the BBC first broadcast live television coverage of the Olympics, was an earlier generation. Worth noting in passing, though, that the world's first fully functional electronic computer, the Baby, was created in 1948 at Manchester University. The Baby was not small, but all the astonishingly powerful portable devices you see in this scene, and billions of others around the world, are its direct descendants. They too use processors designed in Britain called ARM, which is an abbreviation for another abbreviation. There's another bit of unspoken subtlety in the boys' video game. It's about blowing stuff up, and the music we hear is Push the Button, followed by the intro to Enola Gay, which is a song about the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The first atom-splitting experiments were also performed at Manchester University, and the original patent for creating an atomic chain reaction was applied for by a Hungarian scientist working in Britain. Back to the plot. We've covered potential parents and children in the earlier sections, so now we reach adolescence, as represented by June, Frankie and their friends. Just as Pandemonium focused on earning a living and Second Star to the Right on social care, so Thanks Tim is about home life and leisure. Listen carefully to the lyrics of the next song though, it's a fairly bleak view of adolescence.
Wanted to be a fireman, then I lost the desire, man. The second I got old enough to buy myself a cider can. I'm
not going to analyse this segment in detail.
Even if you were in the stadium, certainly at home, and even if you weren't in the stadium, you wouldn't have been able to take it all in. So I suppose it's too overambitious, really, in a way. But we didn't want that to put a brake on us.
For example, in this one image, you get London through the distinctive Harry Beck design for the Underground map. You get a double or even triple British engineering triumph. the first mechanised railways, the first underground railway system, and the first tunnel under a major waterway, for which Isambard Kingdom Brunel was project manager to designs by his father. And again, if you listen to the lyrics, the song Going Underground has nothing to do with railways and everything to do with being a young adult in a troubled world.
People might say that I should strike for more, but I'm so happy I can see the fine things happening here today. A show of strength with your boys brigade.
In The Tempest, two teenagers find themselves instantly in love, but the boy, Ferdinand, must do a bit of work before he can win the lovely Miranda. In this scene based on that story, the part of the magical spirit Ariel is played by mobile phone technology. The teenage friends are wandering through the British music of the decade dance floors of a very large club, in which nearly every tune played has also been a major hit outside the United Kingdom. But the challenging lyrics follow them everywhere, from the Who's My Generation in the 60s.
People try to put us to down, talking about my generation, just because we get around, talking about my generation.
To the Sex Pistols' Pretty Vacant, accompanied by pogoing dancers. The Prodigy's Firestarter is accompanied by a neat Beijing-style rectangle of dancers, but it's deliberately disturbed by putting extra performers along the front edge. Meanwhile, epic use of the pixel paddles and other elements of vertical action, as throughout this entire segment. I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles is an American song which seems to have a theme of collapsing financial schemes, very topical in Britain 2012, but it also has a local context, being the theme song for nearby football club West Ham, who have since moved in as seasonal tenants of the stadium. The kissing medley after Frankie catches up with June is surprisingly political. Go through it using freeze frame. When Ferdinand and Miranda finally get together in The Tempest, Ariel provides a magical musical entertainment. In East London 2012, we get local hero Dizzy Rascal, who was a grime musician a decade before it was fashionable, then realised that unfashionable pays no bills, and teamed up with Armand van Helden to make the pop hit Bonkers. Pop it may be, but it has some troubling links back to the character of Caliban. Now, finally, we also get to celebrate and thank Tim, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the man who provided the key to turning the internet from the nerd's paradise of the 1980s into the ultimate information sharing system for everyone. Among all the epic representations of data travelling around the world, there was, as usual, a semi-hidden message. The scenes depicted on the walls of the big house were human rights protests. The World Wide Web's information sharing should help people to understand and claim their rights, unless of course their government creates a great firewall to limit their electronic access to the rest of the world. Subtle applause at the end for Tim from the dancers, using the lights of their phones. The torch relay film segment should probably count as another interlude, but it is integral to the overall theme of the evening, linking the 1948 and 2012 Olympics. There's just one problem. The relay was another Nazi invention. Most innovations from 1936 were avoided in 1948, which was the next year the Olympic Games were held due to the Second World War. The torch relay was repurposed instead as an inspiring link between countries ravaged by war, and it has remained an Olympic fixture ever since. The present-day component of this interlude provided another spectacle outside the stadium. The happy twist for TV viewers was that the boat was being steered by East London boy made good David Beckham. He had already taken his turn carrying the torch, so now he was mentor to young footballer Jade Bailey. In the souvenir programme for the opening ceremony, another quotation from The Tempest is given in connection with the very last performance of the evening. That's not where it occurs in the play, not even in the last act. It's right after the celebratory song and dance, when the wizard Prospero remembers that Caliban is preparing to kill him, and for all his knowledge he is still just a human being. Nobody lives forever. Here the opening ceremony presents three modern versions of Prospero's meditation on mortality, beginning with a memorial video wall. It was implied at the time that this section commemorated the 7/7 bombings in London on 7th July 2005, the day after London won the right to host the 2012 Olympics. As this letter from Danny Boyle to spectators shows, that is not exactly true. Danny also invited the brilliant choreographer Akram Khan to devise a dance on the theme of mortality. It may or may not be accidental that the dance begins with a sort of explosion and features 52 performers, the same number as the people killed on 7/7. It's genuinely unnerving because the dancers are hearing a soundtrack in a different tempo from the heartbeat rhythm being played to spectators. Then, over everything, slow and dignified, we hear Emily Sandé, all alone at one end of the huge stadium, singing a cappella the hymn Abide With Me, which takes the ideas expressed earlier in Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer, to the very end of life. And yet, right outside the stadium, life goes on. Another aspect of the Olympic educational initiative has involved schools across the country to provide a guard of honour for the arriving teams, each with a hand-created banner. Luckily, the rain stopped over an hour ago, leaving just enough cloud to keep the temperature from falling too low, so the athletes and their young honour guards are having a splendid time. The parade is also taking the overall theme one step further. Having just witnessed a tale of adolescence in the recent past, we are seeing men and women at the absolute peak of their lives, right here, right now. First team in, as always, are Olympic originators Greece. In addition to the traditional nameboard carrier, there is, at the other side of the team's flag bearer, a child carrying a copper petal. Lining the route to the right, we see some of the pandemonium drummers in nice matching uniforms. This picture shows that most of the parade marshals have not yet arrived. This parade was one of the most elegant achievements of Olympic mass movement veteran Steve Boyd, and it scarcely wasted a second. The drummers along the outer track had arrived during the dance. Then the TV cameras concentrated on them and the Greek team for the first minute or so of the parade. Meanwhile, the marshals were forming beautiful organic patterns in the performance area, a contrast with Beijing's straight lines, of course, around a mysterious circular tent which had also magically appeared while the cameras concentrated on Greece. The country nameboards were a brilliant innovation which ultimately didn't look quite right. These harnesses, which made it possible to wear the nameboards like a rucksack, were very clever, but... By the way, is it politically correct that all the nameboard carriers are young women? No. Is it good psychology? Yup, afraid so. Genius and madness in the same image. Those white names with black borders will stand out against almost any background. Having freestanding letters means that uniformity of style is achieved simply through the font, not dictated by the size of a placard. The harness means that Democratic People's Republic of Korea, in the same large lettering as Cyprus, is not an unbearable weight. But, as seen at left, those supports are very, very wrong. Here's a close-up. It looks like some sort of medical device. Personally, I don't have much of a beef against the dresses. Printing them with photos of volunteers who ended up not being able to participate is a sweet idea. Silly but charming. As for those copper petals carried by children, they are brought in with each team and will be given to the team after the games are over. Thus they serve as a practical substitute for the grand gift exchange programme, which was intended to be centred on the impractical generation mingling friendship voyage. The video screen presentation for each team is based on the sort of infographic often used by broadcasters in such parades, although only the basic coverage of the athletes was fed out to TV companies, leaving them to add their own infographics as desired. This shot shows pretty much how Steve Boyd's parade plan was supposed to work. Flag bearers were instructed to keep level with the nameboard and petal carriers, which you would think ought not to be too difficult, grown athlete matching the pace of a child. To avoid stragglers, larger teams were closely followed by a line of drumming marshals like sheepdogs nipping at their heels. Meanwhile, a dance music set list devised by High Contrast was being played at a fairly steady 120 beats per minute. It had been found that faster music, such as the 140 BPM used in Athens in 2004, was counterproductive. Note also here that some teams are standing on the grass verge rather than up in the performance area. They will move up later if there seems to be enough room. Between the last shot and this, the marshals in the performance area, who are also acting as part-time dancers, have started moving to a new formation, now that a reasonable number of athletes have assembled round the black tent. Everybody was so busy laughing at the sudden change of music to the Bee Gees the moment Fiji walked in, they scarcely noticed the flag bearer's shiny uniform. Although Steve Boyd had devised some clever strategies to make the parade as brisk as possible, some teams had strategies of their own. Circled here is an official running to stop Team USA athletes from deliberately delaying their entrance to the arena so the team gets smeared out over hundreds of metres of track. Here come two more officials to join the effort. Compared with the Spanish, though, the Americans were amateurs. Here we see very tall, long-legged basketball player Pau Gasol dawdling about 3 metres behind a petite nameboard carrier and a petal-carrying child, with the front rank of the team another few metres behind him. The nameboard carrier makes eye contact, then jerks her head to try and speed him up. As this wide shot reveals, the attempt failed, and although Gasol was slow, his teammates were slower, spreading themselves out even more than the Americans. What both those teams had in common was live TV coverage from their own broadcasters in addition to the main Olympic feed. They would stay on screen for their home viewers no matter how long they took. Eventually, though, the parade ended with the home nation Team GB. They were welcomed with David Bowie's Heroes, which is about dreams of a very personal, un-Olympic sort of heroism, and 7 billion pieces of confetti, one for every person on the planet. Whilst Team GB paraded, athletes were moved up from the verge to the main performance area, as it had been decided there was enough room for them all. It didn't matter how long Team GB took to make its ceremonial lap. When the organisers felt they'd had enough time, Arctic Monkeys started playing rock and roll with half the team still out on the track. The total parade time to that point was almost exactly 100 minutes, compared with over 130 minutes in Beijing. It's the Olympic opening ceremony, so there have to be doves, but live birds haven't been used for about 20 years. In London, we were reminded of another great British development from the Industrial Revolution, the rear-wheel drive bicycle. The wings were devised by another of the ceremony team operating at levels of inspired brilliance, frequent Danny Boyle collaborator Sutirat Ann Lalab, who was the principal costume designer for the whole show. The music, a cover of John Lennon's Come Together, adds a cheeky flavour to the motif already seen in the convergence of the Olympic rings and soon to appear again. P.S. Yes, this segment was choreographed by a guy who worked on bicycle stunts for E.T. Next followed the protocol section. Speeches by Olympic dignitaries, a short declaration from the Queen.
I declare open the Games of London, celebrating the 30th Olympiad of the modern era.
The arrival of the Olympic flag. And a heartbreaking surprise to set the theme for the final part of the show. Muhammad Ali reminded us all that nobody, however great, stays at the peak of their abilities, but that's no barrier to living an inspiring life. Once again, the way forward is seen outside the stadium as the shining, firework-igniting boat carrying young Jade Bailey with the Olympic flame arrives in the Olympic Park. Bringing light to dark places is going to be the dominant visual concept for the rest of the ceremony. Jade's journey by boat up the River Lee from the Thames is a further echo of the abandoned friendship concept. Another light shines in the darkness of the stadium, illuminating participants who will take the Olympic oaths. They are in among their teammates, but raised above them on an elevated platform. There have been many subtly subversive elements in this opening ceremony, but the title of the next segment is perhaps the most remarkable. In modern Britain, the phrase is best known as the title of a song by the Smiths, but the lyrics of the song are, among other things, a damning critique of the original religious concept behind the title, the very concept, in fact, which underlies hymns like Abide With Me. The ceremony has taken us through generations of the past and stages of life to culminate in peak performance in the present day represented by the parading athletes. But Muhammad Ali reminded us that we are just another link in the chain, and we are the ones who must accept responsibility while we can to create inspiration for a future generation. Hence, Britain's greatest Olympian, Sir Steve Redgrave, passes the Olympic torch to a bunch of promising teenage athletes. There are two sides to this transaction. His gesture would be meaningless if they didn't accept responsibility for the torch and run with it. The generations must work together. Each of the 7 youngsters has an Olympian mentor in their own sport, and behind those stand hundreds of other British Olympian medalists, some from as long ago as the 1948 Games. Just to puncture the mood, here's another Tolkien meme thingy for you. Back to the bringing of light into a dark place, see how the flame bearers left a trail of brightness as they circled the stadium. The work of the lighting team for the ceremony, led by Patrick Woodruff, is full of subtleties and probably worth a video analysis in its own right. Here, for example, see how a combination of ultraviolet lighting and smart costumes on the marshals gives the impression of a row of doves perched around the arena. And now, the most come-together moment in any Olympic opening ceremony, the bold mechanical cauldron designed by Thomas Heatherwick. As the scriptwriter was reminded by a friend when the mechanism was being tested, the association of multiple flames with the nations of the world is at the heart of Christianity. The TV coverage of the cauldron lighting, beautiful though it was, missed the magical simplicity of the moment, emphasised by the way layers of the music were gradually removed, leaving just a single voice. This scene echoes 2 modern British church interiors. One was designed by Thomas Heatherwick, and the other is the local cathedral for scriptwriter Frank Cottrell Boyce. Take a closer look at that structure above the cathedral altar. Remind you of anything? By the way, this quiet beauty was, of course, about as yin to Beijing's yang as a flaming Olympic cauldron could possibly get. Given that yin is associated with the opposite of brightness, the metaphor becomes rather messy. Tolkien fans watching on TV saw the Eye of Sauron, of course. Owls versus flowers. After the ceremony, the cauldron was moved to the south end of the stadium in homage to the location of the 1948 cauldron at Wembley. However, the cauldron lighting is never quite the end of the opening ceremony. For all their determination to be different from Beijing, the London organisers could not refuse to put on a fireworks show. They cheekily began it by turning the 114-metre high orbit tower into a giant imitation of the Beijing Olympic cauldron. Where Beijing had fireworks including the famous footprints all over the city, London confined its opening displays to the Olympic Park. But this finale was almost the full length of the park, a wall of fire around 1.3 kilometres long. On television it was only seen from the air, because it was really a special treat for a special group of spectators. The people of East London, who watched from every vantage point they could find, enjoying an experience which was really provided just for them. There were fireworks round the roof of the stadium too, of course, and the pixel paddles displayed prismatic colours to match the soundtrack, Pink Floyd's Eclipse. As usual, you need to pay attention to the lyrics. But to counterpoint Eclipse's intimations of mortality, there was an inspiration from the past. To the right of the cauldron here, running round the pixels, you can see the ghost of Jesse Owens, the great American athlete who outdid the Nazis in 1936. Remember those weather balloons from the very start of the ceremony? Here's what you see if you attach a camera to one of them. That's the planet where we all live, far below down there. And then Paul McCartney sang about the end, the Olympic bells sounded again, and it was time for a final campfire sing-along. For the amusement of East London, powerful spotlights made the most of the dispersing fireworks smoke. Ooh, look where that gimmick came from. Another bright idea not copied in 1948 because the powerful lights had acquired very specific connotations. Some people complained about Hey Jude being played yet again, but it is the greatest sing-along song in the world, and anybody who was within earshot of a television could join in. Good night, Tolkien fans. Here are the real last words from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Good night, everyone. Except for those millions of Americans who haven't been shown NBC's recorded version yet, but who have seen some of the best bits, out of context, on the news.